Okay, folks, I've got 11 o'clock and looks like time to get going again on here. Um, we will uh, start the next presentation, which is going to look at cougars and people. Um, and I'd like to give you a little background of how I got started in this. Back in about 1990, I got called into town of Ward, Colorado, where it's a small town, a little suburb, where they believed that a bear had attacked a horse. And the Forest Service guy looked at it and said, yeah, you see these claw marks on here. And I looked at them. They weren't wide bear claws, they were needle sharp. And I realized in the middle of the town, this young colt had been attacked by a cougar. And that started my interest into looking at cougars, people, and confrontations between them along the Front Range of Colorado. So we started working mainly around Boulder, but all up and down the Front Range, Colorado. And you've seen it. Cougar attack, mother killed defending children. Cougar kills cross-country skier, mountain lion shot, mountain lion attacks, and cougars grab headlines. Whereas the reality is the number of attacks by cougars is far below that of deer, bear, dogs, those sorts of things. It even made the different journals out there, Outdoor Life, Jackson Hole, Reader's Digest. You see the one on Reader's Digest called Stalked, Amazing Animal Attacks. That's actually based on the research. A lot of it was based on the research I did on the Front Range of Colorado. Cougar hysteria, as I mentioned in the opening talk, has moved across the Midwest and the East. Everywhere west of the 100th meridian, people are convinced that there are cougars out there and they're going to kill their children. Everywhere east of the 100th meridian, people are convinced that cougars are moving in and they're going to kill their children. So as long as people have children, I've got a job with my cougar ecology and verification class. That is a 16-hour college credit class that I can teach on a crammed weekend. I teach it to agencies and private people, and I've taught it in 17 provinces, Canadian provinces, and states to help people understand the ecology and understand verifying whether cougars are there or not. So cougar distribution, where are they? Well, one of your best sources for information, if you're interested in this, is the Cougar Network. And if you look down at the lower left of that slide, you'll see the website is cougarnet.org. CougarNet is for network.org. I encourage you to go there because on that website, you'll find lots and lots of good information, such as maps like this. And every one of those dots you can click on and get a PDF download of the investigation. Now, west of the 100th meridian in green, those are areas that are totally occupied by cougars. They're there, there's no question on it. And we do know that cougars are starting to spread to the west, and I'm sorry, to the east. Generally, they come up against the Mississippi River and they tend to cross at the northern end where it's very narrow or even freezes on time, but they are spreading to the east. And since I started working cougars, the populations have become established as breeding populations, that is green, in North Dakota, South Dakota, and that one in Nebraska now in the Bobcat Hills and the Nebraska National Forest. That's a breeding population now also. Taking a close-up look there, what we see is cougars from the west get into that breeding population in North Dakota. They go up to the northeast, cross the river, and come down into Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, those areas, and even go further east, which I'll talk about a little later on. So starting with the 80s, particularly the 90s, we saw an activity explosion in the United States. There was an explosion in the western cougar area, that's west of the 100th meridian. In particular, I did much of my research in the vicinity of Boulder, Colorado. And I'd like to give you a little bit of an idea of that explosion. Now, back in those days, I'd given anything if people had cameras and camera phones to work with. It was very difficult for us to just collect a little VHF video. And some of this video is not going to be very good, but you got to realize that represented the very best of the time. And here we are out in Washington, where Western activity started to go up.
It's often become stuck high up on telephone poles, but rarely a cat this size. This 130-pound male mountain lion found himself in a fix when he wandered into the Spokane Valley. 4-year-old Nikki Raby was eating breakfast with her grandpa when she spotted the cat up on a pole in the backyard. And what did you say?
Grandpa, did you see the cougar? I said, no.
Grandpa, did you see the cougar? Well, let's move into Boulder, Colorado, and we see the source of the urban sprawl of cougars and cougars coming into town. That's deer. While I was working in Boulder, we averaged 250 deer a year hit by cars and killed within inside the city limits. And we started getting some pretty good reports. Now, the problem is pet lion activity, and I'll do that talk at the end of the day. But all across the United States, people love their cats and they have cougars, and there are many cougars out there. And our problem is always separating out reports of wild cougars from pet activity. Well, in Boulder, myself, Mike Sanders, Kristen McGrath worked for 11 years from 1982 to 92, documenting cougar-human interactions. We had over 500 interaction reports that we went through. David Barron, in his excellent book, The Beast in the Garden, has documented those reports. And the story, David starts back in 1860 with the movement of people due to gold mining into the area and brings it forward in time to 1992.
He's about 15 feet off the deck. It's July 14th. This is hard to believe. This is very unusual. And now he's on the rock right out, again, right off of the deck. This is a smaller one. This is the second one I've seen now. Saw one about 2 years ago, which is much bigger than this one. Oh. Oh, here's a second one. I can't believe it. There's two of them.
These are all shot on the edge of the city limits. Center of the photo, you'll see a mountain lion. This is a mountain lion that killed a deer in the yard of the people. It's trying to move the deer, but I had gone in and necropsied it, and I chained the deer down, and I set down 100 steps away. This happened Friday at 3 o'clock, and myself and others, we monitored this till Monday about 3 o'clock, and here's what happened. There come the kittens in. One kitten. Now they know we're there. We're in plain sight, but we're just outside the range that they worry about them. And here comes a second kitten in. Now these kittens are up there old enough that they're about ready to displace for mom. During the time we watched, we had fox come in, coyote come in, dogs come in. It was like they were waiting in the edge for the next animal to come in. One would finish eating and leave, then the next one would come in. This report and the previous one were shot on the edge of Boulder, but within the city limits. We had cougars off balconies. We had cougars visiting barbecue pits, barbecue grills. One of the attractants is the food left on the grills. These are two young ones. We started getting reports of cougars that seemed to be possibly creating or increasing in number. So when Kristen came along, she wanted a research project, and Mike and I set her up. She was a undergraduate student at the University of Colorado, and we started collecting reports. Well, the Colorado Division of Wildlife was not real happy. They said by advertising for reports, and what we did was we put out newspaper ads saying, if you've seen a cougar, contact us. They said we were causing a solicitation effect. There was no change in the number of cougars, nor in the number of cougar-human interactions. I hope to convince you differently by the time this is over. They said we were adding to the mass hysteria. So we had to figure out a way to verify the quality of reports, and we developed a system of grading each report. We developed a system of questioning where we didn't give any hints to the answers we wanted. For instance, we might say, did you see a tail on the cat? We didn't ask if it was long. And when we were done with the report, we turned it over and we graded every report A, B, C, D, and F. And for most of the analyses here, we'd thrown out the we'd thrown out the F reports. There's a definite error rate, but we have tried to come up with the quality evidence. And Kristen, Mike, or I, or a combination of us, verified by going to every single location we could, the reports. Well, let's go back to about 1850. And on the Front Range of Colorado, gold had just been discovered, and hunters were starting to arrive. As the hunters arrived, we entered what we'll call the free hunting era. The first thing that happened was people were arriving with their pets. So here's a little model of what was going on. And with the free hunting era, there were no hunting laws. Market hunting went on, where there were hunters who went out and killed everything they could and brought them to town and sold it. At Naturalist, Colorado was a gold mining town of 10,000. 2 miles away was the town of Bluebird, which was a town of just prostitutes. And what happened with all this sort of activity is the market hunting, the deer population started to drop. In fact, the deer population in 1906, it had crashed. Earl Warren, mammologist, could not find a living deer from Cheyenne, Wyoming, down through Colorado Springs. So if we've got 0 deer, we can take that as a 0 point for the mountain lions. Mountain lions need deer for food. So the lions also crashed. We can kind of think 1906, that is 0 mountain lions along the Front Range of Colorado. Well, the next thing we came into was the deer protection era. The hunting community got involved, and the hunting community started asking for reintroductions and paying for reintroductions. 1912 to 1928, deer were brought from western Colorado and Wyoming and released in the Front Range and in Colorado. And there was a short period of time around 1930 when the county of Boulder was declared a refuge and you couldn't even shoot a gun there. And so the deer and the elk that the hunters brought in account for us having deer and elk in the Front Range of Colorado. This scenario was repeated in many areas in the West. Well, the next era was that of the deer damage. Brownlee Geyer was the game warden, and Brownlee kept a careful diary the whole time he was game warden and after he was game warden. I spent a lot of time with Brownlee, and he was in charge. State of Colorado has an animal damage law. Any damage caused by animals is paid for by the state. So he was in charge of the payments. And Brownlee started making payments in about 1955. There were enough deer eating lawns, taking down fences, bird feeders that Brownlee had to pay for. Well, in his books, his notebooks, his diary, he only twice had mountain lions, one in 1944 and one in 1960. For a short period, there was a bounty instigated on the mountain lions, but in 1967, it was declared a game animal. As a game animal, there were protections set up. You couldn't just kill a mountain lion. And for almost 20 years, it was protected as a game animal. Well, I shouldn't say almost 20. It's still protected as a game animal, meaning that there's hunting seasons and quotas, and you're not allowed to take more animals than that. So what we saw is the mountain lion population started to increase, maybe back in 1944, certainly by 1960, and it was increasing over time. Then we come into the interaction era, and the interaction era is where people started recording interactions with cats. And we asked people to tell us about any mountain lions they'd heard about earlier. And we went back in time on every report we could, and we found that people were reporting stuff other people reported. The earliest mountain lion interaction with a human we could find is 1965, but the numbers started going up at that time. Well, in Boulder County, they instigated a mountain lion harvest, which was 2 mountain lions. And initially there were none killed, but then eventually 2. And in the mountain lion harvest data, I also put in vehicles that were, cougars that were hit by vehicles. You find cougars harvest a lot of vehicles. So what you see there is that there were more people and pets, more deer, more lion, and more human-lion interactions, I will argue, ever than in the history of the planet Earth on the Front Range of Colorado. Colorado Division of Wildlife did not like me arguing that way. Well, what we did was we tried to get at the rumor mill and understand what information we could get out of the reports. We had over 500 reports, and we narrowed those down by throwing out the F grade reports to 398 reports. Now, I'm not going to tell you that every single report that I'm going to present here was a mountain lion, because there is a very high rate of errors in people reporting mountain lions. But of the 398, we interviewed 337. 36 were newspaper accounts with pictures or good stories, and 25 were animals that were killed by hunters. So what we're going to do is take a look at this database. First off, this is Boulder, Colorado. At the bottom of the picture is the mountain starting rise up to Mount Evans and 14,000 feet. Boulder's at 5,000 feet. And if you go towards the top, you're going towards the Great Plains, and you would go out into the grasslands to the Appalachians. Now, what I want you to know about Boulder is the streets are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, going from the mountains out. And on 4th Street, you have the hospital, and you have the start of the fraternities, and the fraternities go out several more streets from there. So kind of keep that in mind. Thanks to the gold rush, we had all sorts of abandoned gold mine shafts still open into the mountains, and open ponderosa pine, which is very good stalking ground for cougars stalking deer, and the deer population going up in Boulder because the people baited them in with great gardens, vegetable gardens, flower gardens, bird feeders, places to hide behind houses during snowstorms in the wintertime. As I mentioned, 250 deer a year hit by cars and killed within Boulder city limits. Well, this is a map. When I went to the city of Boulder and Boulder County, the city of Boulder was very skeptical of what we were doing. They said I was absolutely wrong. At the city council meeting, the chairman of the city council got up and called me an alarmist. I didn't know what I was talking about. And so the city refused to cooperate. But look closely at all the dots you see on there. Those are records that when we stopped taking our records, the county continued, and that's the records of cougars along the city limits of Boulder. I established training classes and trained tracking teams, and we would start at the north end on a good tracking day, say snow, I would call my calling tree, and the teams would go out. Team A would track 3 miles from their car and pick up their car and drive back to the rendezvous. Team B would go 3 miles, get C's car and come back. C would go 3 miles, get D's car, D would get E, F, everybody'd come back to the rendezvous. And in 3 hours, we would track 30 minutes of city limits. As you'll see, we proved we had cougars inside the city limits. Every week of the year, we had 2 sets of kittens born under porches. The cats are quite willing to come in the city limits. Let me give you another example I've worked with. We're going out to Seattle, Washington, and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And out there, I worked with Gary Kohler and Rocky Spencer. This is a tribute to Rocky. He was killed during the operation. He backed into a helicopter blade and was killed. Well, here you see one cougar. These are radio collar locations of that cougar. And what you see is the yellow line here is the fringe of the city limits. You will see cougars coming right in, that cougar coming right in among the houses. And everywhere you see red and blue dots are places where my footprint tracking teams work, and we track the cougars going among the houses in the city limits of Boulder. So, I'm sorry, in the city limits of Seattle. So let's go back to the reports. Of the 398, 331 of the reports we analyzed as how the lion would have perceived what was going on. What the lion saw, what the lion, quote, thought to be anthropomorphic. 288 of the 331 reports had information on what the lion was doing 261 times before it became aware of humans and what it did 287 times after it became aware of humans. In 126 cases, cougars just were passive. Oh, that's a human. Okay, so what? 167 cases, they were active. In 67 cases, humans became dominant over cougars. And in 37 cases, the cougars became dominant over humans, issuing warning communications 26 cases, near attacks in 7 cases, 4 attacks overall. Now, I'll go into all this stuff in detail, but we analyzed it first as the cougar would perceive what was going on, and then we have a similar tree for the human perception of what was going on. Well, this led to a lot of good information. First off, lions were found in close proximity to houses. 31% occurred near houses. That means on the property, often in the fences of the people, 261 observations. 15% of all the observations were in urban communities, 8% in rural communities like Nederland, Ward, and that sort. We had cougars coming into the fences around the yards. This is inside the city limits of Boulder. We had them in trees and people's yards. In this case, this kitten was in the yard all day. The owners called in all sorts of people. Everybody went over and photographed it. And it had a great time. Somewhere after dark, it disappeared, went home. This cougar here, both of these cougars were visiting fraternity parties. You can see the fraternity guys in the background. And no, the cougars are not drunk. They've been drugged with ketamine to remove from the vicinity that was there. And if you'll remember, the fraternities start at 4th Street and go 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th out there also. 79 of the interactions were actually very near the house. 21% of the time, cougars came up on people's porches. 10% they were in the driveway. 1% inside the garage, and 1% on the roof. Now, the 1% in the garage involved a kid down at Colorado Springs who come home after school and went in through the narrow door in the garage and cornered the cougar in the garage, which, trying to get out, attacked him and chewed him up a bit. He called for help. He grabbed a screwdriver off the porch and jabbed the cougar several times, and it fled. The neighbor came over, found him in trouble, and called the ambulance. Then he grabbed his rifle and went down the road and found the cougar too wounded to go on, and killed the cougar. The 1% on the roof was a fun one. The fellow had a weather vane that was one of those owl weather vanes. He heard something at night. He came out, saw something was up on his roof, went back and got a big flashlight, came out, and there was the cougar sitting on its haunches. It would sit there and it would bat the weather vane, and the weather vane would go spinning around. It looked at him and said, "I'm not bothering you, leave me alone." Batted the weather vane and spinning around again till the owner finally went inside and left him. Roger Smith has helped me out on a lot of the things there. And Roger and his pet dog are here to remind me a little bit about what's involved with the cougars and people. One of the questions is risk and what increases the risk. Now, we had, I think it was about 75 reports of people with dogs interacting with cougars. 67% of the time, cougars became dominant over the human-dog interaction and actually attacked them about 1/3 of the time, attacked the dogs. Jogging with a dog is baiting for cougars. Jogging with a dog is baiting for cougars. I have people say, "Oh, my dog will protect me." Well, one situation, we had the fellow look up the trail, and here come his dog down, running as hard as he could, and the dog ran down between the legs of the owner, and the cougar came right beside him, knocking the owner out of the way. Another situation, the cougar chased the dog down. The owner grabbed at the cougar and kicked at it. The cougar clawed him up. This was our second attack that we had in Boulder. Jogging with a dog is simply baiting cougars. And we'll come back to an issue of motion later on and what's involved there. But you increase your risk if you are out there with a dog. Well, the city said I was an alarmist. County started putting up signs and working with me, and all was going good until Scott Lancaster.
In Colorado, in the high country, where they have recently been reminded that nature and civilization get closer to one another at risk to both. Here's ABC's Tom Foreman.
The people of Idaho Springs, Colorado have never feared living in the Rocky Mountains. But 2 months ago, 18-year-old Scott Lancaster went running behind the local high school and never came back.
And right up here is where it happened.
Scott was attacked and killed by a mountain lion, a cougar. Scott's mother is shocked.
I was not aware that they had never come down into the town or near the town. We lived here 23 years. I've never even seen one.
Well, I bet she was shocked that she wasn't aware of it, because cougars are around all the time. They're quite willing to live near towns, in towns, if you don't kill them or destroy all their habitat. But the risk is extremely low. Yes, there is a risk, but it is an extremely low risk. Our first cougar attack was a lady by the name of Linda. I won't give her last name now. She was jogging and encountered a mother and probably a kitten about ready to be kicked out. And she climbed a tree, and the cat climbed up the tree and clawed Linda up from the waist down. And at the time I produced the database you saw on here, we'd had 4 attacks, and then Scott Lancaster was killed. Well, across the United States each year, there is a symposium and workshops on cougars, every other year, I should say. And it just turned out it was Colorado's turn to host it that year. And those of us who were there decided that we would make it the Mountain Lion Human Interaction Symposium. And it was April 24th to 26th of 1991. The newspaper people said, "Hey, Jim, what's the risk? You're going to be attacked by a mountain lion." So I looked at the number of, just back of the envelope, playing around stuff. I looked at the number of people in Colorado times 365 days a year and found that we averaged 1 attack per 425 million. If you were in Boulder County, where there were more mountain lions, 1 attack in 35 million. But your chance of winning the lottery is only 1 in 5 million. So you're 7 times less likely to be attacked by a cougar than a mountain lion. Well, math's fun. With a little twiddling on paper, you can have all sorts of great answers. Let's look at it a little more scientifically. What happens is when we summarize our reports in 1986, we got 31 reports, 1 situation where the mountain lion became dominant. In 1987, we had 39 reports, and in 2 situations, the mountain lion became dominant. 1988, 48 reports. Then you notice they're going up, 91, 94. Now in 1991, bear in mind that that's only up through the first 3 months, because I was getting this ready for the Symposium on Mountain Lion Human Interactions. And you'll see that in 89, 90, and 91, lion dominant interactions were increasing. The first attack, Linda, 1990, and the attack with Scott there in 1991 resulted in a death, and there were a total of 4 attacks by the time the symposium happened. So what we see here is an increase in reports and an increase in lion dominant interactions. Yet I'd been told that I was creating a solicitation effect, and there was not an increase going on. I would hope this would convince you that yes, the population has gone up and the interactions have gone up. So what we did was we put together an ethogram. Now an ethogram is a list of behaviors. The complete ethogram would be every behavior a cougar could have in its life if you had a complete ethogram, but this is just the ethogram of behaviors in cougar and human interactions. On the left-hand side here, you see 4 interaction categories: presence, warning, near attacks, and attacks. Let me tell you a little bit about these categories here. And now these are based on the 398 reports. In attack situations, we had cougars advancing straight on people, using springing crouches and circling people. Now you notice that S crouch is a spring, and if you go down here, you see a hiding crouch. In a crouching situation, people would look out and the cat would be flat on its belly, maybe crawling through the grass. In the hiding crouch, people did not sense a urgency or the cat was coming after them. It was trying to hide maybe trying to leave. Whereas in a springing crouch, people sense that this interaction was bad and that that cat might come for him, probably would come for him. Now, if we go to near attacks, we see that there are some advances, some springing crouches, some circling, but a host of new behaviors. The false charge, the flattening ears, eye contact, and watching the person. Now, notice we have eye contact there, and we have, flattening ears there and ear flicks. Have you ever toyed with a cat and maybe it's a little toy and it will start to flick its ears up and down, or it will add in the tail flick where the tail goes boom, 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 right and left? Well, one time I got a call in from a lady and I went out. She said she had a deer in her backyard she thought a cougar had killed. And when I went out there, there was definitely a cougar killed deer. And I explained to her and told her to leave it alone. We'd get it removed the next day. And the next morning, she and her daughter went out and walked down the cougar talking and not looking. And there laying across the cougar, or laying across the deer, was the cougar. Its tail was going twitch, 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 twitch. You know what it means if you're trying to take a toy away or play with a cat. When that tail's twitching, it says, hey, I will fight you for this item here. Eye contact and watching a person are two particularly interesting things. For example, we had a cougar that's really interested in the person, makes direct eye contact. Where that person moves, it doesn't matter. The cougar keeps an eye directly on it. The head moves, the eyes are on it. We had a husband, wife, and a 5-year-old daughter on the edge of Boulder. They did not have regular bathroom. They had to go to an outhouse. All day long, the cougar laid on the ridge. If mom and dad moved by, there was no interest in them. But if the little daughter moved, the eyes watched the daughter exactly everywhere it went. Well, that night after dark, the father took the daughter out to go to the bathroom, and the cougar came around the edge of the bathroom towards the daughter. He shot and killed the cougar. Whereas watching a person, they'll just lay there and, oh yeah, that's a person. So what? Yeah, there went a person. So what? So those are two definite differences. Well, what you see as you go from left to right on this list is sort of a de-escalating list of behaviors. But early on, the Colorado Division of Wildlife was very unhappy with us for taking reports from people. And so we were kind of cautious and very conservative in our rating of what was going on. But we noticed more and more as time went on that cougars were maintaining a presence. They just simply wouldn't leave. Classic example, jogger in the morning jogs by a cougar on a deer carcass, called the Boulder game warden. He comes out, and with a .357 Magnum pistol, he pumped 5 shots into the ground near the cougar. And the cougar laid there and looked at him. Yeah, that's a mighty noisy thing you got there, but I'm not leaving my food. And in some situations, cougars just maintain presence. Remember the picture I showed you of the kitten in the tree that was there all day long. So in attacks, we used Paul Byers' definition of cougar attacks, which means physical contact actually made. Near attacks means that for everything we could see in the behavior, they should have attacked, but they didn't. And so we're going to have to ask the question, why didn't they? In warning communications, the cat seems to be saying to the person, hey, you know, you and I could get into it, but there's still an opportunity for you to take off. Why don't you just back off here? And then presence is they just happen to be present. Now, let me give you a couple more examples. I'll give you 2 more, for instance, with dogs. We have a dog owner who has a pen attached to his house. He hears something going on, comes out, can see his dogs are very upset, goes back in, gets flashlight and comes out, goes over it, and one dog is down. The dog was actually dead. And as he does, the other dog is standing beside him, growling and so on. He shines the flashlight, and there's the cougar 5 feet away from him. And the cougar jumps out over the fence. Similar situations, another person, he comes out to the back door, turns on the light. The cougar has got the dog by the head. That's an important point, dog by the head. And he jumps up, tries to jump over the fence and falls back in, jumps again and falls back in. and then he lets go of the dog and jumps out. The reason he has fallen back in was the dog was on a leash, and the leash was stopping him from going over. In the third dog situation, for example, we had an owner come out. The cougar had the dog by the head, starting to pull on it. Cougar ran in and grabbed an old cavalry sword, and it didn't have a very sharp blade. He hit the cougar with it several times. The cougar didn't leave, so he jabbed it straight on with the pointed sword. When I got there in the morning to investigate it, the sword was bent in a letter Z, and the cat, of course, was gone. So these are just a few more of the examples of the type encounters that we were starting to get. Let's play now with the ethogram. Early on, Colorado Division of Wildlife was very upset with us for collecting information from people, let alone listening to what they were telling us about sounds, because they didn't feel that untrained citizens could give you a good report, especially on sounds where there was confusion on what words meant in reference to sounds. But about half the way through, Mike and Kristen and I realized that people were using the same terms to describe sounds in the same situations. So for the last third of those reports, we collected sound information. And what you see in attacks was hisses and spits. In near attacks, the word growl was used. And in warning communication, growl, snarl, moan, and hiss were all used. Now, there are a couple of interesting categories, the yowl and the scream, and also it was called a caterwaul. And in those situations, what happened, I'll give you a couple of examples. The people picnicking on the west side of Boulder at a big band shell there heard what they thought was a woman screaming for her life. And they went running around the corner of the building, and a herd of deer charged by, almost knocking him down, followed by a cougar. And the cougar came towards where the men were, actually, though, after the deer, and they threw beer bottles at it. Yowling, oftentimes when we got the word yowling, we went out, in fact, most of the time, and proved that it was red fox. Red fox makes some incredible sounds. And in another presentation, I do have sounds of these different animals. But we found red fox, raccoons, and owls 2/3 of the time when people swore they heard cougars yowling. But some of the times we found evidence of males and females, and this was probably a mating situation. The last category there is vocalizations with cubs, and oftentimes this would be described as a cough or a chirping, and these seem to be signs to tell a cub to go up a tree, a cough, or even come down a tree, and the chirps was a call to the cub. So definitely, I believe vocalizations also fit into the behavioral categories of attack, near attack, warning communications. So the big questions of all, if you've got a warning communication going on, what was done that possibly averted the attacks? In 26 of the 398 reports, we were able to gain information. In 15% of those reports, people just stood there, watched very quietly, didn't move. In 12% of the time, they threw stuff. Beer bottles, as I mentioned, sticks, rocks were thrown at the cats. 8% of the time, they maintained presence, but looked big, raised their arms, spread coats out. One person picked up a bicycle and held it up. 8% of the time, they backed away slowly. And remember, we had cougars in the driveways. In 8% of those situations, they honked their horn and ran it off. 4% of the time, when throwing or wielding a stick or something, they actually made contact with the cougar. And on cougars on porches, by knocking on the window 4% of the time, caused the cougar to leave. There is no set thing to do in a cougar encounter. People want a yes/no answer. I need to remind you, every cougar is an individual. And if I'm down in the bar and somebody's drunk and comes up to the table, there's no single way you handle that drunk. Everyone's an individual. Well, the same with a cougar. You have to learn to watch its behavior and decide what to do. Should you be quiet and watch, or should you be active and discourage it? And I'll talk a lot more about that in this afternoon's presentation, where we have analysis of different behaviors and how effective they were. Well, the next question is, in those near attacks, what possibly averted attack? Now remember, near attacks, all the signs were there, but there were more warning communications. It seems like in near attacks, they were saying, we've just about exhausted our behavior, we're going to have an encounter. 29% of the time people threw objects, and 29% of the time they yelled. In nighttime situations, 14% of the time, flashlights were shown directly in the eyes of the cougar. So there are different behaviors that seem to have worked. As I said in this afternoon's presentation, I'll go in the one I call lion proofing, yourself, your kids, and so on. I will go into that in more depth, but this gives you a idea of what we saw from the reports. Now, since then, there have been two other nice studies, one by Paul Beyer and one on a person's name who escapes me at the moment, I'm sorry, of what happens when cats actually make contact. And the bottom line is, if contact's actually made, you want to fight. Maybe remember I mentioned that cats were dragging dogs away by the head. In situations where cats, people played dead or were unconscious, as in a dog, the cats simply drug them away. Playing dead is a behavior that's used if you've got a bear attack going on. It's not for cats. Cats will just cart the victim off to somewhere they can feed on them. I want to share one other example here. My favorite one of what happened that didn't come from the Front Range, it came off Vancouver Island. A young Native American girl, about 15, was babysitting, and she had several kids there, and she heard something. She turned around, and the cougar had picked up a baby that was wrapped in swaddling clothes. The 15-year-old girl ran over, grabbed it by the back, shook it to let go of the baby, and then with all of her might, she flung that cougar back over her shoulder. When she did that, she staggered a minute to catch her footing, turned, and it grabbed a boy, 5-year-old boy. She ran over and grabbed the cougar again, shook it, and threw it away, and the cougar left. So if you're looking to hire someone, we've got her name and address. She can take care of the kids for sure there. That's one of my favorite cougar interactions. Another one is a lady and her family were walking down the trail. This one happened at Great Bend National Park when Tony, Ruth, and I were down there. And as they walked down the trail, a deer crossed in front of them, running as hard as it could. And they watched, a cougar went by, running as hard as it could, and they wow, wow, wow. And they went over on down the trail, and the lady bit over to tie her shoe, and the cougar came back and bit her on the butt. She stood up and screamed. The cougar went, oh, what's that? And ran off. So just some fun interactions there with the cougars. So folks, want to keep on tracking. That's about 45 minutes worth. I'm going to stop on the sharing here. There goes the sharing. And I'm up. Before I go on, I'd like to invite you to this afternoon's presentations. We'll start out with Brad Orsted with lots more of great photos and video. And then I will go into the topics of cougar proofing yourself, lions among us, how do we coexist, cougar hysteria case studies, you'll like that one, and finally cougar ecology and pets. Well, Shauna, can you unmute there? And Garrett, why don't you turn your videos on too, let people see that there's a person there. And do we have any questions?
Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I don't have any questions coming in yet, but I had a question.
Go for it.
In the Boulder situation, if you think about today's efforts and what people are doing today, I know you stay in contact with folks all over the country. What changes were implemented after you did all that work down there? Or what were any changes implemented as far as a community level response?
Regretfully, not a lot of changes overall. at Boulder, we had the people that said, well, the problem is deer, and most of Boulder County is private land. They said what we're going to get is the state to open up hunting laws, and for one season, we're going to kill every deer we can in the state. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. If you kill every deer, and their goal was to cut half the population of deer out, what are cougar going to feed on? And I think that might be pets, maybe things that run around, little things on two legs. Thank goodness that got defeated there. There's no practical way to reduce the deer population, which are baiting in the cougars. The best thing they've done, and this is county and Colorado Division of Wildlife, was instigated great signage. And I'll talk more about that this afternoon. Education, education, education is what they've done. Let people know that the odds of an encounter are very, very small, but it can happen there. And all across the United States, as I say, I've worked with departments of natural resources in 17 Canadian provinces and states. The biggest thing has been education. And then there's all sorts of debates and things go on about cougar hunting, cougar removal, and so on. In Colorado, they did not increase any cougar removal. Okay.
Two more questions just came in, Jim. I'll take the most recent one, and I think Garrett was gonna address the other one with you. In any of those attacks, was pepper spray effective?
All that research was pre-pepper spray, but since that time, I have well documented 4 situations where pepper spray has been used, 2 situations where kittens were involved and the females started to protect the kitten, and in other situations with adult cats that were close, not real full-blown attacks. Pepper spray was quite effective. You got to think that cougar has very big eyes and very big nostrils, and it's very effective against it. And Dan Staylor, if you're still on, do you have any comment on that? Would you care to unmute and comment?
Jim, can you hear me?
We've got you.
Yeah, pepper spray, I've never been in a situation to use it for captures. We just don't put ourselves there. But I remember Kerry Murphy telling me about using pepper spray once during a capture operation where he was trying to get his dogs back from a risky situation, and he had to deploy it, and it was very effective. So I think, like many wildlife, they'll be very sensitive to the pepper spray, and it is definitely something that should be in your toolkit, just like it is with bear encounters or other wildlife encounters.
Kerry is one of the 4 examples I was using. I just didn't want to put his name out on it. I don't know if he would be totally enthusiastic about the fact he had to spray a cougar. But this afternoon, I will talk about what to carry in your hiking and around your yard and so on in cougar proofing. I think Garrett's up with the next question.
Jim, there was a question asked in the Q&A. Is there a good database or collection of recordings for different lion localizations?
In the class I teach, which is a 16 contact hour class, I have one hour lecture where I go through and people number a sheet, and then I go through and play the sounds, and they got to figure out what it is. And then I go back through and play the sounds with the animal there. That is the only collection I'm aware of. If you Google, you will find different cougar sounds here and there. There is one lady who has made a detailed study of cougar vocalization. She's documented 16 categories and what they mean. And I'm sorry, her name is escaping me right now, but that would be, that's a written thing. That's not the actual sound. So Google will give you some of them. But as I said, when we investigated sounds, the vast majority of things people claimed were cat sounds were actually, the largest number were red fox sounds, raccoon sounds were second, owls were third, screech owls only. Other owls are pretty dominant. as to false sounds. And then many of the people don't recognize what are the real cougar sounds. Other questions?
I think that's all for now, Jim.
Jim, we just had one that came in. I know you mentioned the grill drippings perhaps being an attractant, same can happen with bears. Just in general, is there something that a community might do to possibly limit, or mitigate nuisance interaction?
There's a lot the individual can do for themselves, their kids, their yard, their neighborhood. And I'll go into that in detail this afternoon in cougar proofing yourself. But since we picked on grills there just for a second, what we found is we had cats coming into grills, cats coming into dog and cat foods. We had cats coming into empty dog and cat food bowls. We had cats open screen doors and go into pet food. And food and garbage stored on porches that were not locked.
All right.
Okay, let's give people the bathroom break here. And wait a minute, this is lunchtime. We will see everybody back here at 1 o'clock. Excuse me. For the next presentation, which, if we go back up here, 1 o'clock, next up, 1 o'clock, Cougars Among Us. How do we coexist? This will be Brad Orsted. You're going to see great pictures and films there. So until 1, folks, have a good time.